We appreciate it.
Okay, why don't we begin? We have a quorum, and we're not going to do a lot of heavy lifting in the first couple of minutes and see who pops in. So from Ben Johnson, I'm here, but not as a panelist. Well, can that get fixed, Liz? We'll let them work on that. So, so the meeting come to order at, well, we were right at the hour at 5:30. And I want to welcome all of the wonderful volunteer DAC members, as well as, we don't have any electeds to my knowledge, but we have, do we have any in public? 17 participants, so we must have some in public. And also the wonderful staff. So I'm particularly excited about this because this is a step to actually further work that was done back in 2017, 2018. And it also helps us as the DAC prepare ourselves to fulfill our purpose, to be able to advise the board of directors of NCPRD regarding the challenges, desires, and needs of all district residents. And part of that is the SDCs and how that all works out. So thank you all for that. And we are being recorded, as we heard announced. And I do want to let the public in the audience know that we will have an opportunity for public comment, and we request that you put into the chat your interest in speaking. And I think because it's a public meeting, it could be on any topic within our purview, but our main focus is on this topic because our regular meeting will be in 2 days. So without further ado, Mike, do you want to introduce our visiting experts?
I would be glad to. Thank you, Chair. Doug and John, I'll let you give the kind of curriculum vitae of yourselves, of your expertise, but I'll introduce Doug Gabbard and John Ghilarducci from FCS.
Thank you. And I'll be starting off on the PowerPoint if we're ready to just move right into that. I'm John Ghilarducci. I'm principal on the project and have been with FCS Group for going on 31 years. So, and have done system development charges virtually continuously throughout my career. Doug and I were together involved in the work that we did for NCPRD a few years ago, which got close, but we didn't get anything new implemented for a variety of reasons. And then Doug, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll get started?
Sure. I'm Doug Gabbard. I am the project manager. I work out of our Lake Oswego office when we work in offices, when we used to work in offices. And I was delighted to be part of the effort that John mentioned, and it's wonderful to be working with our friends at NCPRD again.
Excellent.
Yeah, so the way that we've laid this out, because I know that we have a group that is maybe new to the system development charge world, and so we're gonna go through some SDC basics. Some of you, this will be a refresh for some of you, I'm sure, but we'll go through those basics, talk about the law, the calculation framework, and then we will. Doug will take us through the elements of the calculation in a little more detail, and then we'll sort of rehash where we left off last time and what some of the key issues were that we discussed, in the hope that we can get the group's concurrence to move forward from that point. That's our objective. So just as a bit of background, system development charges, what are they? So these are one-time fees paid by new development at the time of development. So they are not ongoing rates. Property that's already developed doesn't pay SDCs. unless they're redeveloping into something bigger. The law allows us to calculate and charge SDCs for water, wastewater, stormwater, transportation, and our topic for tonight, parks, which is, I think, the only one that you will be concerned with. We calculate system development charges based on the cost of infrastructure, so parks, system, assets, and projects. And you can only spend the money on capital projects. We can't spend it for ongoing maintenance of parks or to pay for personnel. It's all about land acquisition and construction of parks facilities. There's often two components to a system development charge. One is a buy-in to existing system that's been built already, park system. And then the other component is about planned park system facilities that will serve future users. And together, those two components are supposed to represent a share of park system capacity that will serve new growth. And it is for system facilities, not just nearby facilities. So it's your share of the whole park system as a new developer. The law, which we follow very closely, is in ORS 223.297 through 314. And this is known as the Sdc Act, or at least it was in 1989 when it was adopted. It gives us a really good recipe for the ingredients of the calculations, what we have to consider, how the money can be spent, all the rules. And it's a really good rule book. Doug and I have looked at a lot of comparable laws in other states, and this is the best one that we work with by far, for what that's worth. This is the statutes summarized at a very high level. All the definitions are in 223.299. The one that has the real meat of the law is in 223.304, and that essentially tells us the name of the two fees, how we calculate them, what we have to consider, those being the reimbursement fee, the buy-in, and the improvement fee, which is the future-looking component. It has the credit requirements. There are requirements to provide public notice before these can be adopted. That's in 304. So that if you were ever going to pick one section to read, that would be the one. 309 talks about the project list and the requirements of the project list for those planned projects. Anyway, Doug and I have had a lot of experience with the statute, and we'll make sure that the charges we calculate fall well within these guidelines.
So let's begin to transition from law into math. So John mentioned that there are two layers of the system development charge, and here is what they look like kind of schematically. First, there's a reimbursement fee, which represents the eligible value of unused capacity in existing facilities. The key word here is eligible. And that is divided by the growth in the system demand, often measured in residence or residential equivalents. You do that division, you have a reimbursement fee. The other layer is the improvement fee. This is the layer that most people think of when they think of SDCs. This is the layer that's based upon the eligible cost of planned capital increasing facilities. In other words, your project list. The eligible cost, again, the key word is eligible. The total eligible cost is once again divided by the growth that those projects will serve. And now you can add these two fractions together to get your system development charge. That's a high level overview of the math, but now we'll drill down on each of these areas. The denominator for both the reimbursement fee and the improvement fee is the growth in system demand. So you begin to define that by first determining the units of measurement that you're going to use to define what that growth is. And we find for parks SDCs, the number of residents or residential equivalents is the most typical way, because people use parks. And so once you define the unit, you figure out what your current customer base is, your resident population, and possibly your employment, if that's going to be included. Census data is great for doing that. Although in your case, when you have a district that is not coincident with counties or cities, a little extra help might be needed. Well, we take that current customer base and we project that into the future. And we will typically look at a master planning document. And in the absence of that, we have other population forecasts that we can look at. We try as hard as we can to maintain consistency between the project list and the growth that will be served by those projects. But once you have a forecast of the future customer base, you take the future, you subtract the current, and the difference is your growth. Looking more deeply now at the numerator of the reimbursement fee calculation, what is this eligible value of unused capacity in existing facilities? Well, think of this, the pie as a whole is your existing park system. Well, most of that is serving existing users, but it is possible, depending on how the math works out, that some of that can be considered available for future users. And if a slice of the pie is determined to be available for future users, then you can ask development to help you recover the cost of that and include that in your SDC. Now, it's important, I don't want to mislead you about how we figure that out. We determine available capacity through math, not through observation. You know, we don't send people with clipboards out to a park and say, well, nobody's using this park, it must be available for future growth. That's not how it works. What we do is we look at your inventory and your project list, and we determine the level of service that you will eventually have after all the projects are built and after all the growth shows up. And we then retroject that level of service back to the present time and ask the question, are you meeting that level of service now? And in many cases, not only are you meeting that level of service, but you're exceeding it. And if that's the case, then you have reimbursable capacity. And so that will be part of a very important level of service analysis that we'll do for you as far as the math is concerned. When we get to that point, I want to pause here, and I thought I saw there might be a question out there, and I certainly invite questions if there are any.
Yeah, well, actually, I was curious whether you wanted us to hold the questions to the end, but on that last bit of a statement you just made there, I didn't quite follow. So I look at it where I live, and most of the unincorporated, we are in a deficit. And so when we figure out available, well, we don't even meet current standards. So there is no overage. And you made some statement in and around that topic. So I would like to hear that part, maybe a slightly different way. Or
you bet. So you mentioned an interesting word, and you'll notice it's a word that I stayed away from. And the word was standard. We kind of steer clear of standards because they don't necessarily help us to calculate an equitable SDC, a proportionate, a fair SDC. Because the truth is, if you measure a park system by an adopted standard, these standards tend to be aspirational in nature and tend to be far greater than what anybody's actually achieving. At least that has been my observation. And that will tend to make it appear that park systems are more deficient than they actually are. When you start measuring available capacity, excess capacity, not by the standard, but by what you actually provide and what you will actually provide in the future, you now have more realistic numbers and a more real possibility of reimbursable capacity. So for the sake of, I very much appreciate the question, and I want to indulge it as much as possible. So let me kind of give you a rough process of how we determine that. When we begin the calculations, we will create a before picture and an after picture. So the before picture has your existing park inventory and your existing customer base, so your population and your employment. And then for that before picture, we will be able to calculate a level of service, acres per 1,000 residential equivalents. Okay. Likewise, we will also create that same picture for the future. So the current inventory plus the projects you plan to build will add all of that acreage together. In the denominator, we will have not only your existing population, but the population that you're going to add during the planning period. And that will allow us to calculate a level of service in the future, not based upon a standard, but based upon your project list, your inventory, and your growth. And if you have a future level of service that is lower than what you have today for a park category, then you have reimbursable capacity. I'm going to pause there and see how we're doing.
So let me say back to you what I think I heard you say in this last part. If we have, I'll use the word deficits, not the word you use, but if we do not meet a standard of so many acres per so many thousand people within so distance, because that's what the standards that I've read before they exist in the current comprehensive plan for unincorporated Clackamas County, which makes up the bulk of NCPRD. So if you happen to have way below what those aspirational, if you will, but so many acres per person within so many walking minutes, and yet I don't quite square that with, because I saw back up on slide 2, you talked about a share of the entire system. So are you speaking about all of NCPRD and its capacity, or are you in fact taking into account the zones that currently exist, which are affected by the SDC funding?
So everything that we're talking about here is irrespective of whether you're using zones or not using zones. Okay. So zones don't matter in this conversation. You can either be doing it for the district as a whole or for individual zones.
But which are you doing?
I'm sorry?
But which are you doing, for the whole district, or are you doing it by the zones?
Well, when we do it, we will be doing it for the district as a whole.
Okay.
We hope.
Right. It is our current understanding that is what we'll be doing. Now you again used the word standard, and I'm distancing myself from that term. All I care about is the level of service that you are actually achieving now, and the level of service that we can calculate you will be achieving at the future, at the end of the planning period. So whatever standard is, whatever you said you wanted to do at some point, I'm ignoring that, because we want to stay in the realm of reality. And if the level of service you have, let's say, for example, this is not uncommon. Let's say you have a category of park that you have, it's currently, you have 3 acres per 1,000 residents. But it's a category that you're not really going to invest in the future. So you're not really going to build any more, but you are going to have growth. So maybe at the end of the planning period, you're only going to have 2.5 acres per 1,000 residents. Okay, you with me to that point? So your future level of service is going to be lower, which means that right now you have more than you need, judging by that future level of service. And that is what gives you reimbursable capacity. That 1/2 an acre per 1,000 is something you have now and will be soaked up by future growth. You can ask development to help recover the cost of that. That's what a reimbursement is all about.
The only thing I might add to that is the planning standard might be 5 acres per thousand, but we don't need to use that in the SDC calculation. If that's the distinction we're trying to make. You could have one planning standard and be deficient against that planning standard, but you could use you can use the methodology that Doug is describing, and you could still acknowledge that this planning standard exists, but we don't need to use it for SDC calculation purposes.
Well, thank you both for indulging me, and I hope it didn't take everybody too far into the weeds, but these are the questions that come up for me.
Yeah. No, it's great.
Yeah, and please don't hesitate to stop us when you got an itch that you want us to scratch.
Thank you.
So the second little bullet point under that is about
excuse me, I noticed that Ryan has his hand up.
Oh, so please.
I don't want to run over that. Go ahead, Ryan.
Thanks, Grover. Okay, and I think you're going to get to this in a moment. The question I have is, I'm going to go back to our system planning process. So we're doing all these calculations, but we don't actually have a up-to-date system plan. So my question is, how you may answer it shortly, but how can we be doing these calculations properly without a system plan that is up to date? And you don't have to answer that if you're going to answer it.
Well, no, I don't think I'm going to answer it as directly as you're asking. So why don't we talk about it now? So what you're asking could be more of a problem in other SDCs other than parks, like if we were talking about a water or sewer SDC. Fortunately, it's not a problem in parks. We can hack together the elements of an SDC calculation a la carte, mainly because we are doing this rigorous level of service analysis that we're doing hand waving about, but until I actually show it to you in tabular format, it's not going to make as much sense as it will eventually. But because we're doing a level of service analysis, we can pull together the elements of an SDC calculation from different places. So yeah, your project list may not come from a recent master plan. Your growth assumptions may not come from a recent master plan, but we can pull the elements together. And as long as we think that these elements are true and as accurate as we think they should be, you are not legally obligated to have any loyalty to any of these kinds of documents.
And then when we do have a system plan, we can then update that easily, or is that a whole new process?
Well, you'll have choices. In general, adopting a new master plan is the most efficient time to do an SDC update, but you don't have to. You have all kinds of choices.
Okay.
I see Heather wants to speak.
Thank you, Grover. Yeah, I'll just add on to that from the NCPRD perspective. If we had a recent methodology update, it probably wouldn't make sense to do this right now, and we'd wait till we have the systems plan. Because we have a methodology that's gotten kind of old and circumstances have changed, it makes sense for us to invest in this change now, but it doesn't mean we can't revise it after the system plan is done. And that would give us a lot of tools for making a new project list that might be more reflective of new priorities. So we're sort of doing a stepwise process to kind of catch up and kind of put us on great footing. So when we go to do our next update, we're sort of current. Does that make sense?
Just to clarify, so when you're using project lists, is that synonymous with the CIP or not?
So what we call a project list is any list that tells us what you plan to build, how much it costs, and what it's going to add to your park facilities. So it can, if you have an official CIP, it can be that, but it can be something other than that.
A la carte again, right?
A la carte. I'm getting hungry.
We want as complete a list of needed projects as possible. That's whether that's in an adopted CIP or a master plan or written on a cocktail napkin. You know, I mean, it needs, I'm making light of it. It needs to be more official than that, but you can make additions to those lists, you know, and as long as you're being reasonable.
Thank you both. And Heather
So-
too.
So we've talked in a rough way about how you arrive at kind of the reimbursable quantity of your current facilities. And then all that's needed is to make an estimate of how much those facilities originally cost you. And then you do that multiplication to find out what can be in your reimbursement fee cost basis. There are some adjustments you may need to make, like if if portions of your inventory were donated, were contributed, were grant funded, that will have to be adjusted downward, because a reimbursement fee is to reimburse the district for expenditures that it made. So once we've done all that, then we divide by the growth and you have a reimbursement fee. This is a pretty big data lift to figure all of this out. The reason why it is often worthwhile is reimbursement fees do not have to be spent on growth-related projects or growth-related portions of projects. You can spend reimbursement fees on simple replacement projects if you want to. That makes them much more flexible than improvement fee dollars. And so it's something worth having if you can have it.
You used the word replacement. So I understand the word. I don't quite get what replacement means in that concept. So because this is all for overage, or I may not be using the right words, but for excess.
So let me give you an
That's
example.
reimbursement. Okay.
So let's say that you have a project on your project list that you have a play structure at a park, and it's getting old and you need to replace it. Well, just because it's getting old and you're going to replace it with something shiny and new, that really does not add capacity. It extends life, but it does not add capacity. So a project like that would not be eligible for inclusion in the improvement fee. And if it's not includable in the improvement fee, you cannot spend improvement fee dollars on that project. But if you have a reimbursement fee, you can spend reimbursement fee dollars on that project.
Thank you.
So now let's move to the improvement fee. So if you think of the whole pie as being your whole project list, some of those projects or portions of projects will serve existing users, and some of that will serve future users. And figuring out which is what the level of service analysis is all about.
Hey, Doug.
Yes, go ahead, Ben.
We had a question in the chat from Ryan
All right.
about whether planning costs can be included. And the short answer is yes. They're considered the first step in the construction of a project or a facility. So generally they're includable.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Ryan.
And the best, and just to be strategic about it, the best way to reflect those costs on a project list is as part of the larger facility project. Now, if you're talking about a master plan, then the answer to that is yes, that also can be includable up to a point, but we might have to give that a less than 100% eligibility. But planning costs for a specific project, I would roll those into the project costs.
Doug, I see Ben's hand up too.
All right.
I was going to ask about the capacity building with replacing a playground, because I'm in the playground world and I see a lot of trends that are actually bringing more families and children to playgrounds when you modernize and create an inclusive or a nature-based play area. Can you explain that and how it relates to capacity building in the replacement definition you just described?
So I'll respond to that in a couple of ways, because this is something we've been hearing from clients in recent years. I'm going to stand by the idea that extending life is not the same as adding capacity. Now, having said that, there was a time when the only costs that we would include in this improvement fee cost basis that we're now talking about, we only included projects that added acreage or added miles of trail. And what we heard from our clients was, look, land is expensive, and if you can get it at all. We are working hard to make our current facilities, meaning the current footprint of our facilities, usable to more people. And so we're adding capacity in a sense, just not in the usual quantifiable acres and miles. So we looked at that and we said, okay, yeah, that makes sense. We should be able to find a way to include that. Now we can't include it at the same level as we do with projects that add to your acreage, because developers are going to look at that as being the key numbers for what is fair for them to contribute to. But we did become convinced that projects that add amenities, that make new amenities that did not exist in the parks before, even if they don't expand the footprint, they do potentially make the park available to a wider audience, to more people, and make it able to serve more people. And so we found what we believe is a totally defensible way of including those in the improvement fee cost basis at a reduced eligibility percentage that reflects the idea that those amenities will be shared by existing users and future users. And so the portion, we argue officially in the weeds now. And so the portion of the future users that will be new, so growth divided by the total future customer base, that percentage becomes the percentage that gets assigned to a project like that. It's not as high usually as what's on a list that's gone through the level of service analysis with the acres and miles, but it's not zero either.
Well,
how close did I get to responding to your question, Ben?
Oh, pretty close.
Okay.
And just a point of clarification, so two current examples is Milwaukee Bay Park or the Concord complex. Both of those already exist, they're already owned, and then improvements are being made to both of those, and that would qualify in the category you just spoke of?
Yes, it would.
Okay, thanks.
And this will make a lot more sense when I start showing you tables of numbers when we get further into it. But this is, we're trying to give you kind of the high level overview. So the improvement fee is, we're determining the costs that are going to be borne by your agency. Same kind of thing with the reimbursement fee. If you're getting a grant, if costs are going to be borne by a different agency, there may be some deduction for that in your eligibility. And then we go through this level of service analysis to figure out the portion of the project's capacity that will be used by new users during the asset planning period. And this is what we're trying to illustrate in that little bar graph that looks like a Band-Aid. I created that, and it was a long time ago when I thought it was cool. I no longer think it's cool, but here's the point that it's trying to make. There are lots. There's one way costs can be eligible, and there are two ways that they can be ineligible. So if you're looking at your current level of service and you're building way more than you're going to need in the future to maintain that level of service. You're gonna double your acres per thousand. Well, you can't expect SDCs to recover a lot of that. You can't expect developers to pay for a lot of that. That we would consider that from an SDC perspective, that's sort of overbuilding for the level of service that you're really entitled to have. And so that's the salmon colored square at the top of the Band-Aid. Also, if you're going to have a level of service in the future that you currently do not meet, your current level of service is actually lower, then in that case, you really do have a deficiency, and you cannot expect development to pay for that either. And so that's the lower portion of the Band-Aid. And it's that sweet green spot in the middle that you're actually allowed to put into your SDC, which is the cost of keeping up with a level of service. And a little soundbite I like to use, feel free to use it. SDCs are for keeping up, not for catching up. And that is one thing we have to help you avoid, is using SDCs to catch up, because development will object to that with cause. Yes.
Yeah, well, I'm minor in, so the thing about, so I'm concerned about House Bill 2001. We're off track, but it's exactly in this. We already have less than whatever, but we don't have as many parks as many other places have parks. And they're gonna then provide more middle housing and the like, which is gonna add more demand. And yet we're not currently meeting that thing when I'm not supposed to say standard, but we're not meeting the 2 acres or 3 acres or what acres per and so many miles and like in our comprehensive plan. Well, that's only going to exacerbate that. But then you just said, and I'm not pinning it on you, but I'm trying to understand. So you can't catch up. So how do you ever catch up?
Well, if we're talking about catching up, then when we talk about catching up, we're not just talking about having to accommodate more growth than you expected to a few years ago. It's really about a level of service that is getting bigger. So you can figure out how to accommodate more growth than you expected, but you could still keep the level of service at a reasonable level. And that's what you need to do. Remember, a level of service is a fraction. It's facilities divided by population. So as the population gets higher, you just need to add a little more facilities, not a lot. John, I thought I saw you wanting to get in on that.
Go ahead, Heather. I see Heather.
Okay.
I was just going to add that, Grover and Doug, your comments and your questions point out something that's really fundamental to how we move forward in building a system in the future. And that is that SDCs are one piece. And so we talked about this pretty early on in the orientation of DEC, but we have many tools that we need to use if we want to expand ultimately our system, and including our level of service. And we have an assessment now that provides some support, and SDCs that provide some support, as well as grants and things like that. But ultimately, there are tools that help really meet those needs that that we're talking about, or whatever standard you said, if you want to bring your level of service up. And those are things like bonds. Those are things like increases in assessments,
right,
that allow that you to bring a system up to a new level or catch it up to your existing level of service. And it sort of balances the kind of minimal thing that SDCs can do, since they're only supposed to be providing for growth.
Exactly.
Thank you for that. I don't like it, but thank you for that.
Observing that will keep you out of trouble. The final thing that I want to touch on before I turn it back over to John is the idea of SDC credits. And truthfully, I'm not sure how big of an issue this is for the district, but it is in the law. And so we'll talk briefly about it. So when a developer comes along, you are entitled to, as a city would be entitled, to tell them that they need to build stuff. And so you might find yourself in a situation where you want to tell a developer that they need to build a park facility that is on your list, on your project list. And you can do that. But if you do that, the developer is possibly entitled to compensation according to the law, and this is what this law is all about. So if you tell them to to build something, it is a condition of their development. You are exacting that. If it is identified in the capital facilities plan, meaning your project list. And that last bullet point is basically the extent to which the project serves more than just the developer's development. To the extent that they build something that's going to serve more people than just the people who are going to move into their houses, you have to compensate them for that. And that compensation can take the form, and we suggest that it takes the form of SDC credits. And we can talk more about SDC credits if you want. An important thing to realize is the amount that you would have to issue in credits is not easily discernible from looking at your SDC methodology. You might have a project on the SDC list that says neighborhood park, and it's through the level of service analysis, we determined that it is 75% eligible for inclusion in the improvement fee. That 75% does not tell you what you would have to pay, what you would have to give in credits if a developer built that for you. You would have to go through a different kind of math to determine how many residents they were bringing in and what the level of service standard is to find out what was in excess, what acreage was in excess of that. So be aware that if you need to issue credits at some point, there will need to be an analysis of what is due, and it is not obvious from the project list. And with that, I will turn it back over to John.
Thanks, Doug. So most of the time that we spent discussing policy issues and policy options back in the 2017-2018 study was about whether or not, and if we do, how many, to continue with the zone, the area specific approach to system development charges that the district now uses. And we wrote extensively on the topic. We talked about modifying the existing area specific charges. We talked about going to a uniform SDC, which would apply throughout the district service area. And then we talked about a variety of hybrid approaches. At the time, and we went through in these papers the pros and cons quite extensively of these approaches, and I will boil it down for you in probably oversimplified fashion. But the big benefit to a uniform approach is that the district then has the flexibility to spend the money that it collects anywhere in the district as priorities are identified. And there was concern expressed at that time about money being collected in one area, being spent in another, or some parts of the district maybe being underserved and never seeing money invested in their areas. What was reassuring to them was understanding how the responsibility for spending money fairly throughout the district service area just shifts to the planning side of things, as opposed to the accounting side of things, where you're collecting money in these buckets and then you have to spend the money in the buckets or areas where that money was collected. That seemed overly restrictive and really limiting to the district's buying power if you can only spend money collected in one area in that area, which I think is a natural expectation if you're going to have those area specific charges. So that was hashed out extensively, and the steering committee agreed unanimously that moving to a uniform approach would be a better fit for the district. We went as far as appearing before the Milwaukee City Council, where the City Council at that time passed a resolution to support that uniform approach. But That was the extent of the process at that time of adoption. That we'll show you this. Please immediately forget all the numbers that you see here. We did share the preliminary calculations of a uniform SDC with the steering committee and then with the city council back, as you see there, in April of 2018. One of the reasons that the SDCs did not go forward is because you'll see in a minute, these were reductions against the district's SDCs in, I think, 2 of the zones. And there was a really good reason for that. We were deducting the existing fund balance as part of the calculation, which is part of the methodology. And that fund balance has now been largely erased. So that deduction won't have to be made. We expect these numbers to look very different when we do the calculation in the near future here. So, but just so you know, that was what was presented at that time. And as a refresher, these are the current system development charges that the district applies in Zone 1, which is actually the urban growth boundary around the city of Milwaukee, Zone 2 west of I-5, and Zone 3 east, I-205, and Zone, yes, Grover, yeah.
Well, actually, is Zone 1, as you describe it, the city of Milwaukee, or does it not also include the urban growth management area to the east?
It does include the urban growth
Bigger than
management
they are.
area to the east, yes,
Okay.
yeah.
So it's not just the city of Milwaukee. They happen
Right.
to oversee it, but I got it. 'Cause
That's right. Yeah, sorry
being in the
about that.
unincorporated, we deal with it all the time, whether cities versus unincorporated, like libraries. All our libraries have unincorporated people as well as city residents, and it's like, who gets a say? And so I'm thrilled with where we are now and where we're going forward, since we'll be able to move forward with it. I do have one other comment though. When I look at this, so if you'll notice, I live in Zone 2, and I do believe all of Zone 2 is unincorporated. And so let's look, I'm going to use round numbers, $7,000 per individual family versus $4,000. How can we possibly justify that? I'm not asking you to do it. I'm just figuring, how could we possibly ever justify that, given the demand from most of Zone 2 is to be able to provide more affordable housing that adds a premium on top of everything that gets built, which raises the prices and blah, blah, blah.
So, affordability is just a significant issue everywhere on system development charges. One of the issues with parks in particular is the cost of land is going crazy. So there are some ways to begin to address this. Doug's done some I guess groundbreaking work in tiering single family SDCs by home size. There's some pretty good data that up to a certain size, the size of a home has a correlation to the number of occupants, and the number of occupants essentially gets back to parks demand. It's interesting, once you get past a certain size, that correlation goes away. So once you're dealing with a 5,000 or 7,000 square foot home, it's just as likely to have 2 people in it as a 2,500 square foot home. But anyway, that's one of the ways that we can do it in the methodology. But the larger picture is still a very tough one to address. So I don't know what else to say there until we actually look at numbers,
Yeah. What I appreciate is where I do believe we're heading is to a universal across, and that was what was agreed to in essence back in 2017, 2018, and I assume that's where we're still headed. So I'm looking forward to getting there.
And I guess that's the big question for tonight is, and you may need some time to reflect on this, but is it fair to say that consensus recommendation is something that we can take going forward to apply to the work that we do?
I have to say, I'm one person speaking, and we haven't heard from the other members, so that was just my opinion. So is there more on the next slide, or is this the end, or?
That's
Oh,
what we
That
got.
is the end of our prepared material. Yeah.
All
And
right.
we're just sort of, floating the question out there now.
So I had a follow-up to what Grover was talking about. This is Dave. And we were talking about these affordable housing that were going in. There's some large apartment complexes going in. I guess they're west of I-205 now, but are those being charged the parks fee because of I guess, are they being charged the parks fee and just because, or not being charged because they're affordable housing? I guess that was the question. Because there's when it was 100 units and when it was 250 units. So that's quite a bit of chunk of money.
So, I don't know that specifically if the district is charging those or not.
We have not waived any SDCs based on those conditions yet. Those are policy decisions that we can make. And one of the things that's super exciting about going through the methodology is some of this starts to make a little more sense, and it also gets more confusing when you get in the weeds, but you'll kind of start to see when Doug and John start plugging things in, you'll kind of get to see like what the levers are and what ends up affecting both the rates and the eligibility. So the rates that are charged developers, as well as the eligibility of a given project for SDCs. And that it isn't to say, and John and Doug and John are always careful to say this, it isn't to say that you should artificially maneuver levers to get the result you want, but it can be instructive to see, for example, we'll be talking about the CIP list on Wednesday. How much does it matter how big our project list is? If it's, if it's 25 million versus 250 million, what kind of impact does that have on the methodology? And it's important to kind of see how that affects things, just as policy choices about affordable housing, or policy choices even about whether how we count employer population and how that impacts the SDC. So there's a lot of really fine-grained stuff that that Doug is really adept at navigating, and I think we'll understand a lot more through that process as well.
Super. Did that get your question, Dave? They didn't have the answer.
Partly, yeah. I just follow up that, like you mentioned before, that the SDCs are a small part of the total project cost. But when I was looking through some of the stuff before, it was around 20%, depending upon what it was what kind of project you were talking about. So it's not going to be a game changer.
Okay, anything else, Dave? Okay, Ryan, you're up.
Yeah, I had just a few questions. So are we in the question period or are we in the opinion period? A little bit of both?
Yeah, that's
Okay, okay, then I'll just give it all to you, right? How's this? So just a question for you. You are going to look at the employee that number as well, right? For businesses.
Yes,
and
we
are
are.
you going to okay? And are you going to compare this to other agencies in the region?
When you say compare this, what is this?
Like the
SDCs?
The SDC calculations, are you going to compare those to other agencies and give us kind of a understanding, or is this a standalone process?
So it's absolutely part of our service that we're gonna share with you the SDCs. And usually when we compare for a single family residence. That's sort of the universal unit of measurement for comparing SDCs. But we've also for jurisdictions that are interested or perhaps on the fence about an employment-based SDC, we can show you where those are being charged, and you'll discover it's an increasing proportion of districts that are charging SDCs are also charging for non-residential development. So yes, we will provide those comparisons.
Yeah, we'll give you a pretty good list, and we've worked with a lot of them, so we will know some of the details about their methodologies too.
Yeah, okay. I think this is great. You guys we're doing this. I think it's great that we're going to one big system. And I also think it's important that we ask businesses to participate in building capacity for our system, because parks and recreation are generators of business and do bring a lot of people to areas and are an economic driver. So I think that they should be participating in the economics of our area. So there's my opinions. I'm done.
Thank you, Ryan. Anita.
Well, I was pleased to see, Doug and John, that you included the information about the study about eliminating the zones. And many of us, or at least some of us, I am looking forward to that. And my question is there any legal reason forcing NCPRD to continue with the SDC zone segregation that's currently happening, as opposed to
No.
returning to the one for all for one district-wide approach?
Nope.
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
That's a real simple answer. Nope.
Okay, so I want to clarify, so if I understand your question, so there's no reason that we have to fully decide how, as an argument's sake, if we left the current charges on that slide a couple slides ago, if we leave those in place for the different current zone areas, but eliminated having the money go just to those areas, or however it is distributed now, and actually made it to be system-wide, as we continue this process of reevaluating what the charges will be, if it becomes universal, et cetera. Am I adding some nuance? Because I don't know that that part of her question got answered.
So explain what you mean about keeping the current
Well,
charging
Means
system the way it is.
charging by zone and spending without restriction, essentially, I think, right? Is that right,
Yeah,
Grover?
well, I'm just, in the moment, we don't have a universal rate. You proposed one back then, but it's never been adopted.
Right.
So
Right.
in the transition, do we have to wait till we get a universal rate before we can eliminate the zones? Or can we just keep the existing ones while we're in process, but no longer keep segregating the funding from SDCs?
You gotta
boy.
honor the methodology that is currently adopted until you adopt another one.
Yes, but does the methodology required while we're looking at those rate changes to stay in
Yeah.
zones? That's the
Yeah, it
question.
does. Yeah, it does.
And that's in the Oregon
well-
revised statutes or what?
Is that what?
In the Oregon revised statutes?
I
that it has
see.
to-
I don't know if, and Doug, we might, I don't think there's a definitive answer to your a definitive legal answer to your question. I think that there's a definitive political answer to your question, which is you could make some real problems for yourself. Because I think it is strongly implied, if you're gonna go to the trouble of calculating zone specific charges, that you're going to collect and spend the money in those zones. And I think if you varied from that, I don't know if you were challenged, if you'd lose, but I just think you would certainly be inviting a potential challenge. So that's about all I could say. I don't think that's been tested anywhere, though. Doug, can you think of a test case for that? If you're asking a strictly legal question, I don't think we know.
Well, if the question was, if the last methodology was area specific and had and if our understanding was that under the previous methodology we needed to spend in certain ways, what is the legal status of looking at new SDCs as opposed to adopting a new methodology? That's more than you wanted to get from me.
If it was in the previous methodology, and I guess I'm wondering, who knows if it was the spending rules.
Right.
If it was in the previous methodology, then we have a pretty definitive answer. You can't break that part of that methodology, for convenience while we're working on this uniform approach. If it's not in that methodology, and yeah, I don't know if it is or isn't. If it's not, then I think it would still be very, very dicey.
Okay, so there's two things I want to add here. So one, we're at the end of our allotted time. We're not stopping. I just want to speak to that. And so I don't want to go farther and farther into that. I'm willing to stay longer. If someone needs to leave sooner, feel free, but I'm willing to go longer. And all I really want to complete that part of the conversation is, where would we find out if it is in the methodology that you just spoke of? That beats one. I don't want the answer now, but that's something I'm interested in. And secondarily, how long do you think it would take, given you're the guys who are in the middle of all this, for us to have the new rates? They still have to be approved by the governing board, and they have to be approved again by Milwaukee. So what time frame are we talking?
August.
Was that August?
August, yes.
Okay, good. I was hoping April, but now it's August, and it's nobody's fault. And thank you
Yeah,
for that
Heather,
straight
and
answer.
Heather will provide at the DAC meeting on Wednesday. We'll break that out a bit more.
Okay, good, thanks. So I'm done with all that, and I'd like to call on Ben.
Thank you. I kind of need things boiled down to a very simple level for me, because I'm kind of simple. So describe for me, let's just say Oak Grove has like a heyday in development. Ryan's going to be super happy. What does this mean for all this conversation you're having about SDC collection and where it's spent based on zones? Because I'm a little bit confused about that, how it works with a district, and how development in a certain area and money is collected in a certain area and how it's dispersed. Can you describe that in a very simple way for me? Thank you.
So
Ryan needs help too.
So if that development were to happen now, and by now I mean before the adoption of a new methodology, then the collection of money would be governed by the current zonal schedule and the map that accompanies it. If that development happens after the adoption of a uniform charge, then development there will pay the same SDC, whatever that ends up being. They'll pay the same SDC as a development in any other part of the district.
And it just goes into the general pot, not necessarily in the area that Oak Grove is in, correct?
That is correct.
For the new methodology.
That's correct.
Okay.
At the very least for the new methodology. Now John and I have been hemming and hawing about how the extent to which things are binding on the multiple pots of money now. It is safer, definitely, to treat them as multiple pots of money. But once you have a uniform charge, you have one pot of money.
And the important, did that answer your question, Ben? Okay, good. Yeah, the importance for me is we are one district, and I'm a big advocate that we return to being one district as opposed to three segregated zones within one district with separate funding sources and funding methods and funding blah, blah, blah.
Yep. There are all kinds of good reasons to do it that way.
Well, and we were founded that way. That was a promise that was made to the people who voted to make NCPRD a reality in 1990. So anyway, yes, Deborah.
Well, I was wondering if you could provide us next time with, I'm interested in the relative size of the SDCs to the total funding pie. So like for parks, what percentage of the total funding for the parks are SDCs? And what's the relative amounts of, say, reimbursement for, say, single family dwellings, other compared to apartments, compared to, does that make any sense?
It makes perfect sense, and we will. So when we do the analysis, we will show you a table It looks like a sources and uses table or a budget table of all the money that you're going to spend, that you plan to spend to build your projects. The total amount you need to build the entire project list. And then those are the uses, and we'll also show you the sources, which have to sum to the same number. And that will include all of the SDCs at the maximum amount that is calculated. And we'll show you what that revenue looks like. And then there's the delta. There's the difference of the SDCs that are not, the project costs that were not eligible for SDCs. That's the money that you have to go get from someplace else. And we will tell you what that amount is. And then the fun part will be deciding where you're going to get that money from. Is it a GO bond? And these are the things that Heather was talking about, the different parts of the funding portfolio, but we will tell you what that number is.
Okay, that'll be helpful. And I guess I want to reinforce Ryan's comment about maybe the need for a master plan. It seems like we're operating in a vacuum somehow, because that does impact our calculation on SDCs.
Yeah, and Deborah, you're absolutely right, and that if we had the time to do it sequentially how it should be done, we should be doing our systems plan, get the systems plan, which would update the CIP, then do the SDC methodology. Unfortunately, just because we need to do all of it at once, this is the, I don't want to say lowest hanging fruit, but the one that we could pick up from where it was left off and be able to move that ball forward. We'll be talking about the CIP list or the interim CIP list that we'll discuss at Wednesday's meeting. But again, remember that's part and parcel to another different CIP list that would be part of the future systems plan. And we're scoping that out. We'll give you an update of that on Wednesday as well. So the systems plan is moving forward. It's just a slow grinding process as we get these things ramped up.
Yes. Would that finish you, Deborah? I'll be right with you, Ryan. Just a quick comment. I really appreciate the opportunity that actually all of us, Mike definitely included, have inherited here. There is more things to do and in what order. And okay, I think we should start meeting every 2 nights a week for the next 6 months, and we might start getting caught up. Oh no, wait a minute. Not everybody wants, people are going away. Wait. Okay. But anyway, there's that much to do. So we do need to figure out where we can, I don't like the low hanging fruit. I appreciate it as a comment, but the things that we can get done, let's move that. But keep looking at the picture, and thank Ryan and Mike both for speaking to on a regular basis, that bigger picture. Yes, Ryan.
Thanks, Grover. So just one more idea. I think this is a great opportunity. So what I'm seeing is like there's a lot of things that we're doing, and we're starting to hit this place where a lot of big things are going to happen, right? And I think this is the time we should seriously, I know there's a lot of projects that were promised. There's a lot of deficits in funding, but just like with our retirement, just like with our own lives, sometimes we have to invest to make headways down the road. And I think this is the time we should really think about investing those SDC dollars into a system plan that's going to give us that 15 to 25 year vision, that's going to be robust, that's going to give us the chance to make these big leaps in 2 or 3 years. So I advocate, again, that we really seriously consider using whatever funds we have through SDCs and really invest in a high quality system plan that will get us set up for a good foundation. Okay, I'm done preaching on that.
Here. What got me before I ever came onto this group was reading the Contra Costa Alameda, the history of and how that came about. If we don't get ahead of ourselves, we'll never catch up. I mean, the cost of stuff is just way too high, if nothing else. Cool. Okay. Any other comments, questions before we see if there's anyone in the public comment? Liz, do you see anyone in public comment? Oh, yes, sir. John.
I was just going to add just one quick thing while we were talking. I looked up, I found the ordinance that adopted the zones in 2014, and it did specify that one of the purposes of that was to spend the money in the areas in which that those SDCs were collected. I couldn't find the methodology itself, but it's clearly in the ordinance linking the spending and the collecting by zone.
Is that a Clackamas ordinance or or state ordinance?
Gosh, no, oh, it's a county ordinance. Yeah,
Okay, thanks. Okay. All righty, well.
looked like Heather had something too.
Heather's got her hand up.
Yes, Heather.
Just a quick note on that, since there's a question. So some of the things that Jessica sent out for the CIP meeting on CIP item that's on Wednesday's meeting agenda, some of the background docs include that. And there's actually there was a fairly minor SDC ordinance revision in 2017, but it neatly captured all the amendments that had come before from 1994 to 2004 to 2007 to 2014. So that link that's in that email brings you to that document. And then the 2007 methodology is the most recent methodology. And that did list out different eligibility rates and things like that. So there are some things that are pretty hard and fast in stone, but it's another good reason why we're doing an update now.
Okay. Liz, did you see anyone in the public comment world?
I don't see any requests for public comment. We have one person that's not staffed in the attendee list, and I'll give him a moment to raise his hand if he'd like. And I don't see any requests.
Okay. Thank you for that. And so next, I think, well, first of all, John and Doug and all those who contributed, thank you very much. You made it very understandable. I hope it didn't grill you too much or take everybody too far into the weeds, but I find if I don't understand something, I'm not much help. So thank you both, and look forward to next steps as it is. And we'll all be celebrating in August, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Anyone else have any further business? Okay, with that in mind, just a reminder, we're meeting next on the 8th, and we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.